It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome in. Have a happy Monday, at least to all of the Bird Gang out there. We are the Redbird Reboot podcast. We got your co-hosts here, Marcos Labrada at Pancake Soul and me at Blake Murphy 7. And Marcos, we have the Arizona Cardinals in training camp coming in this week. Players are starting to report. Some training camps, like the Chargers, are already full blown. And this is going to be an interesting one, I think, if you are a Cardinals fan, because this is probably one of the more stable times for the team that we've seen since probably the 2021 season, going back to 2015. The Cardinals are bringing back a lot of their guys. They're also bringing in a bunch of new faces on the defensive side of the ball, a lot of new veterans, plus that defensive heavy draft class. We'll be here to break it all down. Before we get started, how are you doing, Marcos? And how has the time off been for you? It's kind of crazy to think that in just a couple of weeks, we'll be having preseason football starting up back here in the Valley.
I'm just glad that we're about to get into like the training camp and whatnot. I'll be honest with you, with the storylines that have been going on with the Cardinals, as far as like, OTAs and everything like that. I don't usually normally like follow any of that because I'm just trying to take the break from the whole entire thing when it comes to that, because what matters to me is training camp. Once training camp gets started and the bodies start showing up and people are starting to like report and we start seeing what's going on with each player and how they're doing in their progression and whatnot, that's when it really does start. And then of course we got the red and white practices, which are, but I guess back then it wasn't such a big deal for any team to have these red and white practices. And now it's like, it's your first taste of what's going on with the Cardinals football and whatnot. So it's getting to the point where we're getting to start the 2025 season. It's getting very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those places where this is one of the more exciting seasons for Cardinals fans in quite a while, for the most part. As always, guys, make sure that you are following us. We've got our QR code for those of you watching on desktop. For those watching on mobile, we've got our Redbird Reboot YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe to. Let's go ahead and start by taking a look at some of the latest news and reviews. The biggest thing, I think, with this week that we can talk about when it comes to the Arizona Cardinals is that there's another defensive lineman that they've added to their roster. They've got Kion Bars, who came out of the XFL. He is a guy with 24 tackles, including 1 per loss and a sack. He had reportedly visited the Bengals per ArizonaCardinals.com. He had played a little bit for the Seahawks and didn't last too long. So you're talking about yet another defensive lineman. My guess, honestly, Marcos, is that what we'll probably see with this signing is that one or both of Calais Campbell, Dalvin Tomlinson, we'll have to wait to see on a Walter Nolan, will probably not be as involved in terms of some of the training camp. Calais makes the most amount of sense for that, given the fact that he is probably entering his final season. Still had a dominant season last year, but it does make sense to have enough camp bodies. And the question now is, could that mean that there's a potential trade on the way for one of the Cardinals' defensive linemen? My guess is it won't be until we actually get into training camp, preseason injuries, and teams actually will have some of those. Right now, it feels like this is just a look, fill out the roster, replace Ben Steele, who was let go from the Cardinals as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does come down to the injuries, of course, because you don't want to make a preemptive move and then let go of like somebody who could become like a rotational body. And if worst case scenario comes, he's a starter for you because of the injuries that follow that are going up ahead. That's why I don't really pay attention to OTAs, because OTAs has a rare occasion of having some sort of injuries. It does happen, but the injuries really do start with training camp because of the physicality.
Yeah, the way that training camps work, also how it used to be, it'd be 2-a-days. Now it's a little bit easier. What we've kind of seen, at least with the NFL, is that the NFLPA has made some kind of transition and changes. Speaking of with the NFLPA, that has been some of the big news this week. Since we do provide your complete cards coverage, we can talk a little bit about it. Long story short, when it came to the NFLPA, a little bit of groundwork was being done by Pablo Torre, and it's resulted in one of the NFLPA members. The best way that you can at least describe it without getting too insensitive is that he was kind of invoicing and using business expenses for strip club visits, which, as everyone can probably say, is probably going to be like a character concern to say the least. He stepped down. JC Tretter, who has been the NFLPA president, he was the Browns center for a number of years, was an active player for a number of years. He's actually stepped down because he kind of came under fire for some of this going on. When it comes to player unions and how those things navigate as far as with money and other places, even the approach that the NFL took, where the NFLPA guy who stepped down, we kind of had a close relationship with some NFL owners. There was some potential conflict of interest. Best way to be able to at least explain it is when it comes to players and guys getting paid, you kind of need to have the union be able to argue for players and be able to have a strong presentation. A lot of that negotiation that was done a couple years back in 2022 or 2021, I think, kind of got the new deal where players got 1% extra, but now we have up to an 18-game schedule, more Thursday night games. This is one of those places where it talks about not just the quality of the product as a whole, but being able to also talk about the work that journalists do as a whole. As this is an article that came out and it kind of bringing a downfall of a couple of key leaders, and hopefully, Marcos, this will be something where the NFLPA will be able to find some new people heading it up, and it's going to be interesting to see if any Arizona Cardinals end up offering to try to move in, if there's anything like that. We'll see if we can follow a little bit of that as long as it's Cardinals coverage, but hey, like, props to Pablo Torre for being able to have some of that story to be able to come out. It's just kind of the most interesting story in the National Football League right now.
Yeah, it's always great to have like investigative journalism that actually does their job and unveils and puts forth like stuff that could be looking for like better futures and everything, or that can get people replaced. It's funny because our own owner has been under fire for that same investigative
Hmm.
journalism as well as Steve Keim. It's something that we kind of already knew about the organization, that they have to kind of push that, but some of us actually are like, somebody break this case open, man. Do something that like bring up something that would actually push forward for better change and whatnot. And it did happen with Robert Sarver. He was the Suns owner for I'm not sure, like 15 years, I believe. And it took a journalist. A journalist was what took him down ultimately. He broke open the story. It got so ugly that Robert Sarver was forced to have to sell. And same thing happened over with the Washington Commanders, who were the Redskins at the time, who had Dan Snyder just running that organization to the ground. Then, little by little, stuff just kind of trickled down. I'm not sure if journalism was what actually caused him to step down, but it was a lot of like influence that pushed him down up to the point where, you had all these, all no, I'm not sure what it's called again. The sponsors, all these sponsors stepping out that finally made him
Right.
hey, and then of course the collective owners, they're like, look, man, we need you to step down. It's not even a choice anymore. So I mean, good riddance. So in this situation, yes, when you have a situation like this and you're looking for better futures, it's always good news for that.
Absolutely. At least, yeah, it's one of the places, at least, where when we're looking at how one of the like, I think you mentioned, at least, of course, the investigative journalism that was done. I believe that it was a former executive, Terry McDonough, was also part of some of those areas. We've seen more of that been settled as far as with courts, but it does show at least that there is still some power in being able to have journalism present. Pablo Torre is the one, at least, who's been going through essentially, like, it was using NFLPA money under the guidance of transportation and being able to, like, as Pat McAfee said, getting shoulder rubs in the second floor of Tootsie's. You're like, oh, there's areas where ultimately when you talk about like spots of corruption and money, the NFL is one of those places where there is taxpayer dollars going in, there's player dollars going in. That's something where ultimately being able to have that accountability is important, and it starts ultimately with the sort of accountability that we're going to see at training camp. Let's talk, Marcos, with getting onto some Cardinals focus here. We're going to go over some of the places in the depth charts at least, but I do want to at least also point out that when we take a look at the additions and subtractions, some of the Cardinals position groups that we've seen are going to have a little bit of questions when it comes to depth. We're going to take a look here at the Cardinals depth chart for those of you watching here online. Thank you guys again for taking a listen with us on your Monday afternoon. When it comes to the receiver position, what you can see with the Arizona Cardinals is that they at least have enough depth post Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson that if you have Trey McBride, you're probably going to be fine. The biggest issue, of course, is that when you take a look at their speed, it comes down to Xavier Weaver, Simi Fehoko. I don't think that Tejuan Palmer, with the size, has the elusiveness to be able to come through with all of that. What do you think, at least with the receiver combos, or anything you're watching for in camp? Because to me, Marcos, it looks like this is essentially Xavier Weaver's job to lose, to be able to have to go up against Zay Jones and Greg Dortch to be able to get actual playing time as the fifth wide receiver. My assumption is that they'll keep five receivers for the most part. What are some of your thoughts, at least when it comes to the receiver group and what to watch out for in training camp?
That bottom of the receiver group is pretty interesting, and Xavier Weaver does have like an uphill battle because of the fact that he doesn't get the snaps over someone like Zay Jones and Greg Dortch. I believe it'll probably come down to like an injury situation where he would get like thrust into starter positions, but he kind of reminds me of like a young Greg Dortch. Like Xavier Weaver is like there's always that like that preseason camp like champion or that MVP per se, and Greg Dortch was that name for a while, and good for him. He was able to get some snaps and even become a starter for the Cardinals. And that's where I feel like Xavier Weaver is at right now. It sucks because it could be a situation where he could be doing everything right. He could be catching every ball thrown to him. He could be running every route as fluent and as crisp and as great as he can. But because of the notoriety of Greg Dortch and Zay Jones becoming both starters, he's not going to get those snaps until they get injured. But I do feel good about him being the fifth wide receiver on the roster.
Yeah, as far as like that battle goes, staying healthy will be the biggest area for him. And then with Greg Dortch, he at least still has that option. But as we've noticed, Dortch has not been a guy that they've really used as a deep threat. He's been a short to intermediate sort of guy, which is definitely something that's worth watching. When it comes to how it looks in camp, I think the biggest thing we're looking for is Marv going to be able to translate from the biceps and the triceps being jacked? Is that going to translate some in camp when he goes and is playing up against press coverage? We got to see last year he was exceptional versus zone coverage, but against press coverage, it wasn't quite the same. Meanwhile, Michael Wilson, who did pretty well against most press coverage on some slants and some of the quick movement, he was used a lot as kind of a downfield threat. And then later in the season, I'll have to look this up on PFF, but I think that there was times where it seemed like he was actually starting in the slot, where Zay Jones was the guy who was able to move to the outside, which is interesting. How do you think with Marv what we should look for in camp this year? Because I can give some insight into what I saw last year with Marv. Was the feet looked great. He had the cans to be able to catch the football. Arms looked pretty slim. It was one of those cases where some guys it works great. Devonta Smith has always been a really slim guy, but when it came to Marv and how he was used in the offense, it just wasn't quite there. Where there was some drops, some issues at least of not being on the same page. And there were times Christian Gonzalez pass breakup against the Patriots on that long touchdown attempt would be the one that stands out the most as far as needing improvement, and hoping that we can see some early signs of that improvement in training camp this year.
Well, you would think that like if he had the arms that he has right now in that catch, that he probably comes down with it because it was a good play by Christian Gonzalez, and it was textbook. Like he got the ball, but you punched it out, so you went ahead and like dictated that reception. Um, I I'm not so worried about like what it's gonna do with his releases at the line of scrimmage. I know that when impressed, if a corner does want to jam him at the line of scrimmage, he'll have a better time shrugging that off. My only concern is like his diamond releases are perfect, but his split releases might take, like, a little bit of a setback.
Mm.
So, the split releases when he splits his legs at the line of scrimmage and then, like, kinda like a point guard that's doing a crossover, you go ahead and do that. Will that weight kind of slow him down on that? Because you need to be lightning quick on those type of releases in order to be able to get off the line of scrimmage and avoid getting pressed and, slow down at that point. And obviously, every wide receiver will tell you the first 3 steps you're not open, the quarterback's gonna turn some other direction, and that's it. You're done. You lost that rep. So, that's what my only concern is. But he had some really, really good split releases as a rookie, I'll tell you that much right now. So, he as long as he doesn't lose that, he'll be fine.
Yeah, and that is one of the things from looking at Pro Football Focus. It's fairly interesting when it comes to Michael Wilson with just some of the snaps and how he ended the season. He had about 550 snaps out wide, finished with 265 out of the slot. When you take a look at how things changed, though, over the last, I believe, 5 weeks of the season, he missed week 18, so that week isn't count. But the last 5 that he played, he actually ended up averaging probably about 2/3 or so of his I want to say not 2/3, sorry, 1/3 of his overall snaps actually did come out of the slot, whereas previously he wasn't playing as much in the slot. It was, I believe, mostly Greg Dortch. When it came down to when they changed up a couple of things, that's something I think that's curious to look at, because with Marvin Harrison Jr., one of the things we've noted was he was out of the wide essentially the almost entire time. They did kind of work in where when you look at week 8, he worked in about 20 snaps or so out of the slot. This, I believe, if I remember correctly, which week 8 was against the Miami Dolphins, of course. Yeah, because he had the 60 snaps since their
Really good
offense
game.
played so much. And so you're like, all right, like we probably have the key. Another good game that he had against San Francisco, at least, that was the game where he only had 36 yards, but he did have that one long catch for that 4th down. Played 11 snaps out of the slot. I believe the one out of the slot that he caught was that Kyler route where he just kind of ran downfield, got open, threw it up to Marvin. Down as the season ended, what we've seen is that they used him mostly as an out wide guy. They used Michael Wilson a bit more as the guy who'd be able to work out of the slot. So being able to move guys around, that's something I think is important. When it came to Greg Dortch, this is where we got to see something interesting where Dortch got most of his slot snaps. We saw a lot of tight end usage down to kind of finish the season when he got the majority of the snaps down there for a lot of the other targets. We kind of got to see that they really liked having Michael Wilson get the majority of the slot snaps, and they would rotate him in with Dortch, where essentially they wouldn't take Marv off the field. But he lost some snaps to Zay Jones when it came down, and as you can see, to end the season, Zay Jones went from not starting. I believe he came off of either a suspension or injury was where he came off of.
Yeah.
And you can see is when he ended the season, they had him as the other outside wide guy for the majority of the time, opposite of Marvin Harrison Jr. How we see that play out is going to be really interesting. Do we see Michael and Zay swap back and forth in that wide receiver 2 roll outside? Do we see them kind of rotate where maybe those are your 3 starters? This is something I think we're going to look for in camp because it's going to tell us a lot about the Cardinals passing downs.
I got
Go for it.
I got 3 things to say about that, and it has to do with all formation and 3 key things that Michael Wilson does very exceptional. One, he's talking about split releases. He's a split release god. He's the guy that you see at the line of scrimmage just shimmy and then get out of his breaks. So when you're in the slot, you're obviously trying to go more lateral than you are trying to go vertical. Most of the snaps, not all of them. So he's very exceptional at doing that. He's very exceptional at being able to get off press, even though slot cornerbacks usually are off the line of scrimmage. So he is a very physical person, great blocker, great person getting out of the out of his breaks or out of his off the line of scrimmage and whatnot. And they want to work both of these guys in on the same side of the field. So if you look at some of the snaps like on NFL Pro and whatnot, or whatever coach's film you guys are able to get, if you notice a lot of the same formations, they have them lined up at the same side of the formation. They'll have Marv all the way to the outside, and they'll have Michael Wilson just on the inside of him. They love having that type of formation for Kyler Murray. So they want Kyler Murray to drop, look at his top 2 wide receiver targets, and then make a choice between that and whatever route becomes open for Kyler Murray. They're just trying to make it easy for him to be able to get it to his playmakers, and those are his 2 best wide receivers. And then they'll have Trey McBride lined up on the opposite side of the formation just to try to give him as much options as they possibly can. So it is a scheme fit that they do that. Oh, you got mute.
That I do. Yes, one of the things I know that we talked about when it comes to with Arizona this last year was 3rd down. When the Cardinals were in 3rd and long, they a lot of times didn't have much of a choice outside of being able to try a deep pass to Marvin Harrison Jr. for kind of a jump ball, and those were just not successful on go routes. They didn't have enough time to be able to get the ball over the middle, or there'd be a lot of checkdowns that we're able to see. Third and long is really difficult for any team, but we saw with Arizona that their rushing offense was very solid, and it really came down to the fact that when teams were able to stop the run against them, and they had to rely on passing the ball, we really saw that there was some flaws in their offense because they didn't really have a deep passing game. This is where I think the Marvin Harrison Jr. and that offense is going to be very interesting to be able to find out, because, if we end up talking about the Cardinals being able to run the ball, get into a good position, but on third down, they end up getting into a predictable spot where they can either mush rush Kyler Murray, his height ends up becoming a disadvantage, or when we end up with something like last year, where if that connection still just does not start, that's going to make things very difficult for the Cardinals when they end up facing some of these tougher defenses who are going to be pretty stout against the run. Let's go and talk now with the offensive line as far as what to look for. The biggest news when it comes to offensive line, as far as news goes, is the expectation for Isaiah Adams in probably being the starting right guard this year. Isaiah Adams did meet with the media this last week. Usually you're going to have guys who are expected to be a starter or take on that role. He's going to be next to Evan Brown. So you're going to get, at least from last year, the consistent same guys that we had from previous seasons. You also have Kelvin Beachum returning. And for me, Marcos, what I'm watching for is when it comes to Arizona, we saw Evan Brown be good, but we didn't see him be great. I don't think you need to have a great offensive starting guard for Arizona in this team, because the guys and how they run counter, they run so much counter where they'll take their guard, they'll pull him. As long as you're athletic enough to be able to follow your blocks, we have seen Drew Petzing and this offense be able to scheme up a great running game, and Kyler Murray's legs add onto that as well. What I think you want to look for is Isaiah Adams when it comes to his, his pass blocking. Last year, Isaiah Adams was, and this is kind of the thing that came out of his draft grade, when you take a look at least with his run blocking overall and versus his pass blocking, it's a very big difference. Per his PFF grades, Isaiah Adams was about 50.3 when it came to his pass blocking, 64.7 when it came to run blocking. That's good run blocking, but not good pass blocking. We saw that especially against the Los Angeles Chargers game with some of those players, and then also at the end of the season against the Niners, were his two worst pass blocking games. Fortunately, the Cardinals were able to win in both of those. But it does show that Arizona is expecting him to take a step up. And when you look at the depth behind him, even though it seems like he's the starter, you've got a undrafted guy in Royce Newman, who I believe has actually been playing in the league since 2021 he was originally signed. So you're talking about a veteran there who's behind him. Hayden Connor is a 6th round draft pick. And then John Gaines, who was one of the first draft picks the Cardinals organization had. This is where Isaiah Adams, like, if you end up not progressing as far as you need to be in pass protection, where the Cardinals look at that and go, hey, we're in a spot where our offensive line is only as strong as its weakest link, that's where I think one of these guys could fill in. And of course, as we've talked about before, Will Hernandez is injured, but he's still out there as a free agent. It wouldn't shock anyone if he got healthy and then came back to the Cardinals and took over that right guard spot when the time was right. Maybe this is one of those Kaiser White or Arizona moving on situations, but what are some of your thoughts, at least with Isaiah Adams, before we talk about the Cardinals tackle situation?
Well, I would be so ecstatic if like somebody that we actually drafted like in the third or fourth round could just take over the position and finally just own it for themselves. As much as I love Will Hernandez, and I've talked about him extensively about how big of a fan I am of his play and stuff, and I still don't understand why the Cardinals are just willing to just part ways with him. Isaiah Adams taking over that role would be better for the Cardinals organization moving forward, because of the fact that he is a rookie that you did develop under your coaching staff and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it'll be a testament to to what our new offensive line coach, I forgot what his name is, something Fry, and what he can do with development wise and whatnot. So I am rooting for Isaiah Adams, but the people behind him don't really give me too much. They don't give me too much to be excited about. And so this is his job to lose. And if he is able to, take hold and get better with his pass protection, who knows if it's just him not being able to pass set very well or jump set very well. But he is, at least better and getting on open space. You're right. Counters like the bread and butter of the Cardinals, counter and pin and pull, which means your guards got to be athletic for them to execute that. So at the very least, we don't have to worry about that in perspective, but you do still have to be a good pass protector. If you don't believe me, ask the Bengals. The Bengals have the worst guard duo in the league, and they're getting their quarterback killed.
Yep, it's been unfortunate at least. So, yep. All right. So let's go ahead now and talk about right tackle, which of course, as we've seen Jonah Williams in the last year of his deal, we talked about if the Cardinals didn't see a defensive playmaker fall to them, and they were kind of in a unique spot because they needed a defensive tackle with their defensive tackle room. They went out and addressed it with two older guys in Dalvin Tomlinson and Calais Campbell. You also felt like they needed to get a young body in there as well. Darius Robinson, you always felt like he was going to be more of a 5 tech who could probably be able to rotate inside to a 3 tech. But for the most part, you really wanted him to be able to be a defensive end. So you needed that interior defensive tackle when it comes to the 4 guys on the line, being able to move that way. One of the things that I think we can talk a little bit about here is what the Cardinals look like if Jonah Williams and Kelvin Beachum struggle with injury issues, because that's something that I think is very interesting when it comes to.
Oh, let's hope this isn't. Did it cut off on your part?
There it did. I should be back on audio now, so sorry for that, folks.
Oh, you're fine.
What we've got at least here when it comes to the right tackle spot is you've got Jonah Williams has battled injury issues. Kelvin Beachum is probably in his last year. He's in his last year, I think, of his deal with the Cardinals. It seems like even if he's going to be there for another season, he could retire. I'm watching Christian Jones this year. Christian Jones has a very interesting chance to be able to come in and be able to secure either being a right tackle of the future, being able to kind of be a left tackle behind Paris Johnson as far as that swing tackle role long term. And if you're in a spot where you end up losing one of Jonah Williams or if Calvin Beachum's age catches up, you don't want to be where you were last year with having to put Christian Jones out there at one point. With Paris Johnson Jr. being the guy who, as we've all expected, being one of those players who you kind of need him to stay healthy, be there throughout the season. It's that right tackle spot, I think, that the Cardinals chose to go with a defensive tackle in the draft. They didn't see any offensive tackles fall. That's going to be something I'm really curious to see what happens. And there we go. Some video now is back. Thanks to folks for waiting it through. At least I know it was a little bit slow on my end. Let's talk about Christian Jones real quick, Marcos. Do you think that he's one of those guys who can gain a lot from camp? Because I think if he loses anything from camp, it may be that the Cardinals in 2026 may be going out and finding that right tackle of the future potentially as early as the first round of the NFL draft.
I would actually hope that that would be the trajectory they take if Christian Jones doesn't end up panning out. I am really rooting for him, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Josh Jones situation where
Yeah.
Josh Jones had a little bit of time playing at tackle, and then you saw, oh, this guy can really, own the position and whatnot. But then they throw him in guard, and then he plays horrible, and we're like, okay, what are we doing here, guys? So Christian Jones, I don't want them to botch his development. You do need to you if you want to be a successful organization as far as like pass protection or anything having to do with your offensive line, you have to get a pipeline and you have to get these guys in order, give them time to develop. Unless you're drafting them in the first or second round of the draft where you can go ahead and start them right away, it's better for you to get those bodies in as well, because you never know when you're going to have to go into your depth and have them step up, and you want them to develop properly so that way once they do get that starter position or once they can compete, you just develop somebody from the 6th or 7th round that became a starter. And if you don't believe that that's a possibility, go look at what's going on with the Philadelphia Eagles. They have a pipeline. They draft in numbers all through the draft. They put him through the system. They don't give him like, hey, you're not going to get out there right now. You're just going to learn the system. You're going to have the best offensive line coach in the league teach you how to be a good pass protector and a good run blocker. And then they end up having an offensive line that's number 1 in the league, and they have like third, fourth, fifth round, seventh round.
Yeah.
What is his name again?
Yeah, it's Jordan Mailata, and it's
Mailata.
interesting. Andre Dillard, we'll talk about this when we do our kind of NFC West
Yeah,
little recap at the end of this episode. He's a guy that they took in the seventh round when they took Andre Dillard, trading up ahead of the Houston Texans for him in that draft. Dillard has just not panned out at all. While they found their guy in the seventh round, it's kind of like a, is it a Brock Purdy, Trey Lance sort of situation here? But the Eagles having the best offensive line coach in the business, the Cardinals are, like you said, having these expectations for Justin Fry after they lost Clayton Adams to the Dallas Cowboys, and that's one of those places where you want to see what the new guy has. I've got a lot of faith given from what we've seen with Paris Johnson and how highly these offensive linemen have been drafted. They've played pretty stellar so far, at least in the NFL, but that's something that will remain to be seen when it comes to the pros. With Christian Jones last year, what's interesting is he played in 2 games, according to Pro Football Focus, only played in on a handful of snaps in one game. I believe it was 9 snaps at the end of the LA game. And then against San Francisco, he actually played pretty much the whole game on offense because of the injuries with Jonah Williams and Kelvin Beachum. He actually had a decent pass protecting grade, even though the Niners were a poor run blocking team. That was an area that he needed to show some improvement in. So that's one of the things that we'll be watching for is, can Christian Jones step up and show himself as being that swing tackle of the future? Next, yeah, go for it. You had something
yeah,
to say.
yeah. So that's exactly what you would want. Like it would be like if Christian Jones was to take the next step, and I've seen him in pass protection, he's pretty good. He's not very good at run blocking yet, but you typically see that from these offensive linemen. It's weird. You see them develop pass protection wise because that means you just got to train going backwards and making sure you don't let your guy beat you. But when in run blocking, of course, you have to follow your cues. You got to get up in space and, start like taking out bodies and whatnot. They usually develop better in pass protection first. And when you see that, that's a good sign because then that means they can give you snaps. And if the starter goes down, like, oh, it's all good. We're not going to kill our quarterback. So it would
Indeed.
also be a good news for Justin. Not good news. It would be a feather in the cap of Justin Fry if that was the case.
Yeah, for sure. He has the athleticism. It's just going to be a question of, will there be a need for him to play this year? And then what will the need look like? You want to see guys who get drafted in rounds 3, 4, and 5. Maybe not start necessarily, but being able to work into that full-time role by the end, as we saw with Garrett Williams progressing, as we've been able to see with Isaiah Adams potentially, and we'll see if that's going to be the case moving forward. They also did take, I believe, Josh Fryer is someone who is another tackle. It's something that'll be interesting because if Christian Jones is not able to take a step forward, there is someone who is familiar with Justin Fry, who is from the Ohio State Buckeyes, that potentially could slide in that spot as well that he would have comfort with. With tight end, there's not as much, I think, to talk about. My guess here is that we'll probably see them have a camp battle between Travis Vokalek with one decent catch. He was kind of the guy that when you saw him in camp from Baltimore and came in last year, you kind of knew he was going to stick as like the 4th or 5th guy. The Cardinals have officially waived and moved on from Bernard Psychovitz or Psycho. Vokalek did a good job of being able to stick on the roster last year. I have a feeling that when it comes to Josiah DeGuara, he may not actually stick this year. We'll have a future show where we'll do our kind of final 53 man predictions after camp starts, but that's going to be a battle between those two. I think that what we've seen is that it's pretty set with, you got one of the best top 3 at least tight ends in Trey McBride. Some people are arguing he might be the top, dynasty or at least long-term tight end when it comes to not just pass catching, like you've been able to see at least with Oakland having this is their Las Vegas having their top tight end oh gosh, why can't I even remember this? Brock Bowers. There. I was thinking Hunter Henry, but it's another H instead of BB. You got your blocker in Tip Ryman and your pass catcher in Elijah Higgins. If Trey McBride goes down or misses time, you can just move Elijah Higgins into the pass catching role, Tip Ryman into the blocking sort of role. Degura is someone who I think that may actually make the roster because he's a guy who can play in on special teams and has a little bit of flexibility for both. Probably not going to be the same blocker as Tip, not going to be the same pass catcher as Higgins, but if he's able to offer a little bit of that, then I could see that being the case. Tight end, I think, is pretty set for the Cardinals. You want to make sure you avoid injuries with Trey McBride because I think that the way that the Cardinals offense works, he's going to be your most important player, as we've seen being their top receiver last year. Let's talk with the QBs before we get into the running backs, because I've got a question for you, Marcos, and it is not what is going to be the quarterback order, because we know we've got Kyler Murray as quarterback one. They signed Jacoby Brissett, paid him relatively good backup money to be the backup for the next 2 years. Clayton Tune is the quarterback three. The question is, will they keep a quarterback three? I'm curious because unless they use him specifically for the tush push, is this a spot where he maybe could be someone you try to sneak onto the practice squad with some of the way the contract works? Maybe you end up getting in another quarterback who comes in into camp at least and have him being a competition. I could see this being a case where they keep two quarterbacks, are able to add another defensive lineman to the roster, and then see if they either sign Tune to the practice squad or bring in a new guy, because it is year number 3 and we know that Jacoby is familiar with this offense from his time with Drew Petzing in Cleveland. I don't know if Clayton Tune is going to be on the roster unless they have a specific role set up for him, because from what we've seen, at least, it seems like the Cardinals are set to compete this year with Kyler Murray, and then if he goes down for whatever reason, it'd be Jacoby after him.
Yeah, so I've always so with the quarterbacks, and I have this question with you because I believe that you have to be 3 deep in the NFL to just be safe with quarterbacks, and I know that, like, year in, year out, there's the question of whether they're gonna keep 3 or they're gonna keep 2, and especially with how injuries just can happen to your 1st and 2nd guy. Ask the Cardinals back in 2014, I believe. They went down to the 3rd stringer and made the playoffs, but it was just horrendous. I think Clayton Tune definitely is gonna be a camp, like a practice squad body, because he hasn't shown enough on film for somebody to get enticed or another team to get enticed to go ahead and snatch him away from the Cardinals. But is that 3rd, like, quarterback, in your opinion, like, is it like an issue of, like, money, or is it an issue of, like just roster, like, a spot being taken?
Yeah, with the emergency third quarterback rule, they can have an inactive emergency third guy for a regular season or postseason game, and they must be on the club's 53 player roster. So you can't just elevate a practice squad guy. They have to be on the roster. Um, in order to have that, they have to have the two quarterbacks that are there. My take is that I think that within the past years, because we saw that it was essentially Josh Dobbs with Clayton Tune behind him. They just that was what they ran with, and then he had one game of Clayton Tune before Kyler Murray came back. It feels like it's one of those places where, because of the team's pass blocking and how they play their game, we haven't seen as much of quarterbacks getting some of these big hits with how their offense has operated with some of the West Coast timing, Shanahan style, you want to call it. I don't think it's as important. Now, if you get to a spot where there's a significant injury, and then you're talking about, a difference between, like when we can go back with the Josh Johnson approach with the Niners in that playoff game against the Eagles. We saw the Brock Purdy injury. Josh Johnson essentially kind of was the guy who came in and then he got hurt. So you're talking about, he just has to hand the ball off. There's not really any sort of competitive play there. I think that with where Arizona stands here, unless they have significant value for Clayton Tune, will you take that value at quarterback over just saying, hey, we're going to keep a guy on the practice squad? Maybe it's Clayton Tune. Maybe we get a preview of a guy that we like who's been on a different team, who can come back in. That's where I think that you're probably going to be looking at. If I had to say, hey, do I want to keep Clayton Tune on the roster for this season, or do I want to have, say, a Michael Carter be on, whether on the practice squad, if that's something that happens again, or having it be 5 deep to make sure you can spell James Conner for late in the season. You kind of get down there with the defensive lineman too. I think I would lean toward just saying that Clayton Tune, he probably hasn't shown enough, I think, to be able to stick around versus being kind of just the one guy that they had to have. So I think that it's less a money factor for me and more that I think that there's more talent, especially with the Cardinals adding to the defensive side of the ball. Tons of defensive linemen. They've got more linebackers. They also have plenty of corners. You're going to want to make sure that some of those guys can stick on the roster as well.
All right. Yeah, that because I always ask that to
But
myself is like,
it's a good question, at least honestly. We ask that almost every year, and then you always need a guy for the third preseason game, which used to be fourth preseason game. So I think that will be the Clayton Tune role this year. Let's wrap up offense talking about running backs before we go to the defensive side. Also pretty straightforward. They like what Amari DiMercato brings in pass protection, and he's able to, when he gets an open lane, accelerate pretty quickly. They've used DJ Dallas as a kick returner. I don't think that they're going to be in any different place outside of with Michael Carter. I think that there's a possibility he sticks on the practice squad or similar to where it was last year. They just don't have that same trust as they do in DeMercado, despite the fact that we've seen Carter last year was able to run the ball pretty effectively when Connor and Benson missed time. It's a big year for Trey Benson. I think if you can go out of camp and see the Cardinals have a 1A and a 1B, you'll feel pretty good about the Arizona Cardinals because James Conner is 30 years old. If you can get another 2 years out of Trey Benson on that contract, maybe he gets to take over and have a full-fledged chance to be the running back one next year. Maybe he just is paired with James Conner for the long run as the old man keeps running, and we say old man, he's younger than me. I don't think there's that much to talk about when it comes to running backs. It's pretty much just going to be about how does James Conner's health look. And we saw Trey Benson take some steps forward last year. A lot of people thought he was a waste of a roster spot. And I think what we've seen is that running backs, they're not all going to be a David Johnson out of the gate. Even David Johnson, he had Chris Johnson playing over him for the first half of that 2015 rookie season. You kind of need some time when it comes to running backs to be able to adjust, especially in terms of pass protection and being trusted with the intricacies of the game versus just the get ball, run straight, follow your gaps. It's just a different sort of adjustment where you can see a lot of return in seasons 2, 3, and 4 versus just season 1.
yeah, it does take a little bit of time, especially if you already have your starter developed or not developed, established, like James Conner, who's been established with the Cardinals for the last 4 to 5 years since we've signed him. So Trey Benson is a different type of monster when it comes to like running the ball. I think he's more like a straight line type of person, whereas James Conner is like a stiff arm. He reads really well where the open gaps are, where he needs to run, and he lines up his offensive linemen in positions to be able to like make good blocks. And where Trey Benson hasn't learned that yet. Trey Benson is a little bit more less patient with those type of runs and whatnot, and he hasn't manipulated the defensive line like James Conner does. For instance, like James Conner would get the ball, kind of like see where the helmet of the defender is over whoever's in front of him, like pass blocking for him. And he would do a move where he would move to the other side to shade to the other side to trick the defensive lineman into thinking he's going to hit this gap. So as that defensive lineman's two gapping, moving over to the other gap, James Conner switches back to the open gap and takes it. That's how he gets 5 to 6 yards a carry.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm very excited to be able to see is how does Trey Benson look? That's one of my biggest camp storylines because it's one of those cases where, like we've said, if Trey Benson doesn't take that next approach, you're going to start talking about the Cardinals looking at running back early sometime next year. I think that the offensive weapons for Arizona, there's a lot to be determined from how this season goes. You have Marvin, I think we're obviously saying like he showed a lot last year, but there's a lot that's going to be proven. Michael Wilson's health is a huge factor, and so you want to make sure that you at least are able to have a running back waiting in the wings for James Conner, who at this point, if he has another 1,000-yard season, like he's probably a lock for the Ring of Honor with the Cardinals, if we're being honest, just because of his production and performance since the, I believe it was 2021 season in Arizona. Let's switch and talk now about another important group, which is the defensive line. So defensive line, we'll talk a little bit about Calais Campbell when we watch a little bit of tape near kind of the last few minutes. You've got Darius Robinson he was the guy that was the most impressive in camp at defensive line last year before he lost time due to his injury, a soft tissue injury, which is difficult to come back from. Had showed some flashes. I think the biggest thing that we saw was he looked great in his limited snaps in the early preseason game. You want to see that pop back up. You're also talking about Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones and Dante Stills. Those are the three guys that are probably going to be in competition for those last few spots. So uh, we know that LJ Collier, the Cardinals signed him to a deal that is pretty much money guaranteed for the year for his contract. So he's a guy that's expected to be on there. They still have Nichols and Jones that are guys that they expected to start last year that did not. And the one consistent guy that we've seen, at least now that Roy Lopez, pride of Mesquite High School in Gilbert, has gone to the Lions. Lions just lost Levi. I believe they're starting defensive tackle. I can't pronounce his last name, but he's out with a torn ACL for the year. So it's going to be some Roy Lopez, maybe get some snaps in that beat up Detroit defense. Anyhow, this is a spot where you're assuming that Walter Nolan is for sure going to probably get some snaps, rotate in. He'll learn from Calais. Hopefully learn a little bit more when it comes to the questions about maturity and some other places, at least that we've talked about. He's in the best possible environment now to be able to succeed. As we've talked about, the two places that you really wanted to see him be with, as Brett Coleman mentioned, were the Steelers and the Cardinals. I think the biggest question here is, can the Cardinals get anything for Dante Stills via trade, or is this a spot where you say, hey, we got a hit on the 6th round pick in Dante Stills. We have not seen Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones be able to perform and stay healthy. Is this a spot where one of Nichols or Jones or even both may end up being off the roster to pave the way for a Dante Stills, especially knowing that you're probably not going to have Nichols or Jones or Stills see any time if you're going to end up getting a similar season to last year with Calais Campbell?
Yeah, I mean, Calais Campbell is definitely, and he's crazy because he can stay healthy at his old age and whatnot, and still dominate those snaps. So yeah, I think Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones should be off. Like, if it comes down between that and Dante Stills being lost, I would rather just keep Dante Stills. He plays that undersized but pass rush role that, like, you kind of see with somebody like Walter Nolan in a way. They're both kind of undersized for the position, but they can rush the passer very effectively. So I'd rather keep another playmaker like that, because I think as far as like defensive tackle is concerned and whatnot, I think we're pretty deep in that position. So if it comes with between those choices, it could be one or the other. I'd rather keep Justin Jones over Nichols, um, if that's the case. But if they both have to go, I'd rather keep Dante Stills in that situation.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Moving on to linebacker, Cardinals are really depending on the likes of BJ Ojolari to be able to have a healthy season. This is probably his pivotal year. He's still recovering from the ACL. Wouldn't shock me if he's on the player unable to practice list, and we'll see if he gets back into shape at the start of the regular season. That means it's going to be Baron Browning, who the Cardinals re-signed this last year. Jordan Birch will get some push, and then we will see how they'll line up with some of the different looks we saw last year. Mac Wilson was lining up at third down some. I think this year what we'll look for, we're hearing a little bit of the buzz seems to be around Mac Wilson and Cody Simon. I think that Simon, this is something the Bootleg Football podcast talked about when it came to coverage. I think that with him, a lot of it is going to be recognizing that the Cardinals would rush Mac Wilson from the inner linebacker spot. They rushed Kaiser White from the Mike linebacker spot. I think that we could see some snaps for Cody Simon where he's not going to be in the pass rushing role. He's going to be blitzing, which will allow the Garrett Williams, Buda Bakers, other guys like Jalen Thompson back into coverage some, depending on how they rotate through. That could be where I think he gets a little bit of time early. The other competition to be watching, of course, is going to be the wide linebacker or the will linebacker, which is going to be between Akeem Davis Gaither and Owen Papo. I think this is a spot where Papo has a really good opportunity to take over that place. And as we've talked about a whole lot, Josh Sweat, he's the guy the Cardinals are expecting to get double-digit sacks from pretty much from the jump. I think that these linebackers are in a spot where it's a step forward, but you're really hoping that your draft pick investments are going to pan out because you paid a lot of money for Sweat. You spent a second on BJ Ojolari. You've spent mid-round picks on Owen Papo and Cody Simon. These are the kind of guys, and Mac Wilson was one of those, I think, to begin with, too. These are the sort of guys that Jonathan Gannon has schemed into being successful, who get that second contract with another team. We want to see that happen this year with those players.
Yeah, absolutely. The outside linebacker position is just for me, the only concern is BJ Ojulari. If he can stay healthy the entire year, he needs to be healthy. So he is the key for the outside linebacker position. Every other linebacker in that situation, to me, has shown that they can remain healthy the entire year, and they're very solid as far as like production is concerned. With Josh Sweat, and of course you have Baron Browning, who is an up and down person when it comes to his health. Inside linebacker, you're right about it. Cody Simon, he is an amazing blitzer, but the guy is a liability in coverage. So they had mentioned a scenario where they said if you have those two linebackers and you're going to call a cover zero blitz, who do you think you're dropping into coverage and who do you think is blitzing? So the being predictable is the only issue in that sense. So I hope that like he can develop as a better coverage guy because they're really high on Cody Simon, but I mentioned the same thing. You still got to be able to cover because if you can't cover, then you're a liability when it comes to blitzing.
Yeah, that's something I think that's very important. Is like you said, we saw with last year that Kaiser White actually struggled some in coverage. It was the first year he struggled in coverage. It makes it super important to see how Owen Papo will play this year, or the newly added Akeem Davis Gaither, or ADG. Last spot, let's talk the secondary. Pretty much the clearest cut that you can find, with one exception. Will Johnson is one of the second round picks who's not been signed. We've seen that a lot of players have kind of held out to get signed as far as getting a certain amount of guaranteed money. It kind of got kicked off with Alfred Collins signing with the Niners. We've been able to see some players, such as the Bears with Luther Burden, with the 39th overall pick. They signed him to a fully guaranteed second round contract. I would expect that this is something as we get closer into camp. This is the lone remaining contract situation I believe that the Cardinals have to work out. I would expect that that is able to get ironed out because most of the way that these guys are, they're pushing for different guarantees, different amounts. But because of coming off of some injury, if he wants to push for a little bit extra guarantee for injury, that's the only thing that I think could hold this out. The rest of the way, you're talking about hoping he'll be able to come in, secure a starting spot, or at least be able to work his way in along with Starling Thomas. We saw them sign Jalen Jones as a guy who could potentially be there. And then at the end of the roster, how does it play out as far as with the likes of Keitrell Clark? Does Denzel Burke end up with a spot on the roster as a draft pick? Keaton Crawford is probably the guy who's going to be a incredibly good gunner, as from what we've seen. Thinking Justin Bethel is the hope that you'll be able to get from him. Originally a Texas recruit, transferred to Nevada. This is a spot where you're probably going to have about six, maybe even seven different defensive backs, and that's going to, well, I should say at least just with at least for sure 10 defensive backs. It's just going to depend on if you get a 11th or 12th. Biggest questions here: Elijah Jones coming off injury. They spent a third round pick on him, and he kind of was immediately put onto the IR, where it's like you kind of save that roster spot. He's there. You kind of get a red shirt year. Um, you look at Joey Blunt and how he's been a solid special teamer. You also talk at least about Keitrell Clark and the fact that Jaden Davis is another former seventh round pick that the Cardinals had. You're going to be talking at least about how do those things play out, because the Cardinals, as far as the slot cornerback goes, has one of the top slot corners in the NFL, and Garrett Williams, who's able to do some coverage that allows Jalen Thompson, especially Buda Baker, to be able to blitz and be solid in the run game. How that all plays out this year, and if we're able to see the nickel coverage, I think you're looking at who is the next guy after Garrett Williams in case he does end up missing any time. And then you're looking at the back end of the roster. Do you end up seeing the Cardinals give up on a third round pick, give up on a fifth round pick from this last year, move on from a guy in Joey Blunt? Those are the next questions that I think that we have there for the defensive back room.
Yeah, that defensive back room is just stacked. It's just not saying stacked as in talent, stacked as in like bodies and whatnot. So it's going to be a situation where there's going to be some players that we are going to see released that we don't want to see released. One of the people that I keep mentioning, I think Keitrell Clark is probably going to be on that chopping block for whatever reason and whatnot. Uh, Denzel Burke was just drafted, so I don't believe he's going to get. He's not going to be let go for that reason. And Elijah Jones, who I'm really high on, I really hope they don't split ways with him. But like it looks like if you haven't done anything as far as like getting snaps, it looks like you're just pretty much expendable.
Yeah, it's something that's tough. We know when the Cardinals took Hakeem Butler in the fourth round, he got a bit injured, but they kind of put him on the bubble where he was wide receiver 7 and would have probably gotten cut from the Cardinals because he just came in and immediately just struggled with any sort of press coverage. It was kind of like he had to only operate out of the slot, and it just didn't fit anywhere with Cliff Kingsbury's offense. There were issues with running routes. Like, he kind of was a guy that wasn't going to make the roster, so they put him onto IR. He was there, got a second chance, and then was cut from the Cardinals entering into that second season. That's something we'll want to watch at least to see, is that going to be the same story, or is this more of you take Elijah Jones, he comes in, immediately is able to kind of lock into one of those cornerback spots or even the nickel cornerback spot behind Garrett Williams. Don't have to talk as much about special teams, but we'll watch Chad Ryland, especially if he ends up having any struggles in camp. They always will bring in a second kicker. If it's preseason games where there's struggles, that's where you can have some questions. But we've seen from last year was there was a couple of key kicks that he missed that could have helped the season, but for the most part, he ended up looking pretty solid after a rough year from the Patriots. And we're expecting Aaron Brewer and Blake Gillikin. Brewer, of course, being that guy who just keeps chugging along as the long snapper. And Sean Murphy Bunting will probably get released from the team when it comes to just how they're going to manage his injury stuff. Got on the non-football injury list, and we'll have to take it from there. It cleans things up a lot when it comes to the cornerback room, though. We're pretty sure we can pick and choose who's going to make the final 53. Let's wrap up here before we look at some Calais tape on the NFC West. So the Niners had 6 players that were put on the active / pup list. Now, this is not a list that's like IR. You can come off of this list at any time, but it is interesting because Brandon Ayuk, their starting receivers on that list. Andre Dillard, we've talked about him earlier. He's always been hurt when he's been in the league. Yetur Gross-Matos is a guy that played some last year because they were depleted at edge rusher. They spent a first-round pick there. They're hoping that Malik Mustafa can be one of their 2 safety starters, and their other first-round wide receiver, Ricky Pearsall, has had a hamstring injury. Their coach, Kyle Shanahan, said he would probably have been good to go in OTAs, but they held him out. We'll see how that goes with the soft tissue because he's one of those Florida guys. And I noted this week, at least in taking a look back on guys who came out of the University of Florida, guys like Kyer Elam, Kyle Pitts, like there's a whole history of guys who just have not quite been able to stay fully healthy in the NFL. So that's something that we'll want to watch at least and see. But when you're talking about the Niners and their wide receivers, they're kind of on the outs with Juwan Jennings, who was their top guy last year. If not for getting booted from the Cardinals game, he would have hit 1,000 yards, we think, on the season. He's been trying to leverage that for a better contract. So you got another 49ers wide receiver who's in the news for all of that. Something we'll have to watch for is how does their defense look? Can they stop the run with some of these new draft picks? But their offense is something that, with a returning Christian McCaffrey and some of these other guys who've been hurt, is it going to be just as dominant as it was in previous seasons, or can the Cardinals take advantage? I'm kind of curious to know. Do you have, if you're a Niners fan, would you be concerned about this, Marcos?
I kind of like in some instances I kind of would, especially with Brandon Ayuk and uh, Jennings having to have a little bit of a like contract dispute with them and whatnot. If he doesn't take over that number 1 receiver role for them, they kind of are in trouble because I found out this stat that like was kind of very interesting is he's second when it comes to like contested catch rate. I think at 60% of 50-50 balls. I don't remember who led that list, but being that he was number 2 means like that's a wide receiver that you just 100% just want to keep on your roster because of the fact that he can come down with those balls. That's where you want, Marvin Harrison Jr. to obviously improve upon. You want him to be tops in that list, but Andre Dillard, he's just what a case of a first round offensive lineman. It just didn't work out. Yetur Gross-Matos is pretty solid. Mustafa, that guy, yeah, you need him out there. So if you don't have him out there on defense, I would say, oh boy, you're gonna have some problems on the back end.
Yeah, it's something I'm very curious about, at least to see. We have also, as far as the other teams, the Rams right now, everyone's talking about do they have an elite wide receiver room with Devontae Adams and with Matthew Stafford. I think the offensive line, how the running back room looks, because they're going to likely have to pay Kyron Williams for the work that he's done. One of the things that's been interesting was that the Rams, there's not too much to talk about. Like, they have a great defense. Their offense looks like it could be elite. This could be a team that, if Stafford is healthy, vies for an NFC West championship. The offensive line is something to look at. But we do have some, at least, news that the Rams brought up that actually reminded me. The Will Levis quarterback that was part of the Cardinals trade with the Titans that Monty Ossenfort helped kind of generate to be able to move back from the 33rd overall pick, is out for the season. That means that you've got Brandon Allen as the backup to Cam Ward. This is going to be someone who, when it comes to starting the season, when it comes to with the Tennessee Titans, Cardinals are playing the AFC South this year. So when you're talking about the AFC South on the schedule, they get them in week 5. So you're talking about, you're likely going to still see Cam Ward, but it's just interesting to say that you're looking at the Saints. They signed their second round draft pick at quarterback who could potentially start. You've got another rookie on the schedule. The Cardinals also play the Carolina Panthers, and this is a at-home game. So you're talking about a very pivotal opening stretch of the season where the Cardinals need to be able to take care of business against the Saints and the Titans with these rookie quarterbacks. Probably try to be able to at least split with the Niners and Seahawks. And then, of course, the dreaded Carolina Panthers, who have always given the Cardinals and Kyler Murray a difficult time. With one exception, the 2022 awful season was the one exception to that. The last thing we have is that there was a new power ranking of each NFC West team. I'll have to look up what the podcast was. I apologize for not being able to give credit. They release Noah Fant, have the 6th most amount of cap space in the league. They really do like their tight end that they have. I think his name was, what's it called again? AJ Barner, and Elijah Arroyo is the one. So Arroyo is the guy that they really like as a pass catcher in this. Like, you talk about the Clint Kubiak system, kind of a move tight end. They like him enough. They let go of Noah Fant. Some people had suggested that the Cardinals could maybe pursue Fant. I think that he just has not produced or performed despite the athletic profile. I think you're probably pretty good. Maybe you'd say he'd be an upgrade over the tight end 4, but at that point, I'd just probably stick with DeGuara, knowing that Fant will probably pick a team that will give him some actual tight end snap opportunities as well. Let's go ahead now and talk about the last. Also, I want to say at least the Seattle Seahawks. Their big thing that they saw was a Jalen Milroe throw to their wide receiver Jackson Smith and Jigba. We'll see how that new offense looks with Jigba. He had a great catch. It just kind of goes to show that after a rough rookie season from the Ohio State product, he followed up with a 1,000-yard season this next year too. I would expect a similar leap from Marvin Harrison Jr., like how Jackson Smith and Jigba took a bit of time to adjust. It took changing out the offensive coordinator as well.
Yeah.
Seahawks were ranked by one podcast as the 4th team in the NFC West. And I think a lot of that comes down to, you don't know if Sam Darnold's magic can continue. And Jalen Milroe is an unknown when it comes to quarterback. We kind of know what Drew Lock is for the most part. Let's finish up with one last look at one of our fave players, Marcos, which is going to be a little bit of Calais Campbell film. This is going to be him up against the Rams with some tackles for a loss. One of the areas that you can see, and this is, you can tell who Calais is right there. He's going to be the biggest guy over there on the field. You can see him pressure the pocket, get that penetration and sack there on Matthew Stafford to begin. Here's a good look at the All-22 from Doug Farrar as well as he's doing the film breakdown.
Yeah, celebrate, big man. He goes
so
and
you
walks.
can see this is from the 5 tech positions. This is a defensive end. You can see how he keeps the outside leverage, being able to stay upfield with that. That's one of the things that when you talk about what a 5 tech is supposed to do, if you get too far in upfield, you're able to see that the quarterback, he's going to have an easy route to be able to run around or be able just to move. If you get too much infield, you're going to basically have it where it's going to be a double team for the most part with the penetration. If you get too far outside, you're also going to see the quarterback's got room to move. You can take a look at the stunt that they have, at least that they're running in this play. You can see here that he runs through the outside to get the pressure. The guard picks it up. It's basically just a one-on-one matchup. This is why in the NFL, winning your one-on-one matchups is key. Calais has the long arms, at least for the most part, with all of that. He's able to kind of put his hand up, stop it with that veteran move so that Stafford is not able to throw the ball, and then is able to clean up with the tackle too. This is against Joe Noteboom, a guy who's pretty, he's a starter for the Rams.
Yeah, he's
something that we're able to at least see with getting the sack on 3rd down and 7. This is one of those bread and butter plays that we're hoping you'll be able to see from the likes of Darius Robinson. Now, here's another spot loading up at 5 tech against the Raiders. You can see here that he kind of is running upfield, and he gets a athletic kind of hand on, I believe this is Gardner Minshew, unless I'm mistaken. Yep. He's lined up at least over here still at that 5 tech spot. You can see here when it comes to techniques and positions, for those who don't know, you're going to have your 0 tech is just straight up over the center. Your 1 tech is going to be just lined up over here. 2 tech is pretty rare. For the most part, you're going to see the 3 tech, which is going to be the guy here who's lined up. I think this would be normally the Christian Wilkins would be there for the Dolphins. He's going to then try to split both of those guards or handle a lot of those double teams so that the other guys can get some single team matchups. Or if he gets a single team matchup, then his job is going to be get after that quarterback. What we see here is off of the bootleg, Calais is lined up here at the 5 technique. He ends up immediately reading the bootleg, disengages, and he actually, you can see that the guard's a little bit late and I shouldn't say guard, that's the tight end, I should say at least. He ends up being a little bit late in getting off at least. Like he tries to kind of interfere. Calais just, there's nobody in front of him. Minshew tries to step up. That's where it's on the quarterback to be able to make sure you can get the throw, get the play in. Good play overall by the old man. We got 2 plays left on this. This is against the Cleveland Browns. Calais, you can see, is now lined up on the inside spot. He just gets this straight up, just what's it called? I think no blocks whatsoever. This is coming from the outside position. So now you're talking about kind of starts out in a wide position, moves back
4.
into a little bit more. Yeah, 4 lined up at least. Now moves into the 4 from the wide. So it's like, well, there's wide 7 and wide 9. So he starts at the 7, shifts into the 4. He's then able to go right after the quarterback. He just is able to read. This is probably like a pre-snap read by Calais because he sees the running back. They can tell that they're trying to move him across the screen on the play fake.
They straight up try to sprint option away from him, not remembering that this guy at least still has some juice.
Yep.
So you see the tackle pulling to the opposite side of the field, and they try to sprint action away from him without realizing that this guy can still like have some ability to run. They must have just thought that he wasn't going to be able to just get upfield as fast as he could, and he goes and catches up to the quarterback.
Yep, and part of it too is that on this sort of a read, this is part of what the Browns and their quarterbacks issues that they had last year. This is what you should have as far as for a handoff. But even like you said, Calais is still quick enough at that age where if you hand it off, he's just going to keep lunging forward to be able to get that tackle. Like this is one of the things that you can even see when it comes to like when they're trying to do the sprint option without him being blocked. Like it makes sense why, like right there, you can see that he would essentially blow up the play right away. He'd have to beat him, go outside. By that point, you don't really get any forward yards with everything that's set up there. So he just is able to go and get the tackle in on the quarterback as they try to bait him into taking the guy, the running back on the outside. And he just says, nope, I'm going to stay home at least on, I think it's, is it DSW or the guy out of UCLA, able to get that sprint option and tackle him for a loss. Last play we have here is going to be against your New York Jets. This is the Aaron Rodgers kind of game. So you're talking about Calais Campbell now being lined up in, this is the 3 technique. So not the 5, but the 3 technique. You can see he stunts and then the big man just comes right up the middle of the field and just lays out Aaron Rodgers. You can tell that he doesn't have the same quickness that he used to have, but the discipline, the recognition, all of those skills, at least last year, were still there on tape. And it was part of what led to all of these tackles for loss.
Yeah, that was a perfectly executed stunt. And imagining just being Aaron Rodgers, like watching Calais Campbell come after you and stuff, and you're just like, oh boy, now this guy's a 6'8", 6'7" monster coming at me and stuff. Like, what happened to his pass protection at that time? Well, they didn't pass off the stunt like properly, like they should, and the center probably wasn't doing his job. So, I mean, he goes and he pancakes him afterwards.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, yeah, that'll wrap it up for our show here. We'll be back at least when training camp starts. We'll see if we can get a little bit of coverage down from camp as well, going to 1 or 2 of the practices. And we'll be able to talk about our 53-man roster predictions. So for Marcos, I'm Blake Murphy 7. That is at Pancake Soul. Make sure you're following us on X. Make sure you follow the podcast. Follow us as well on YouTube. And we're working on getting some past shows uploaded to our audio platform just to make sure that you guys will be able to listen to kind of some of the past coverage and then be able to keep that moving forward. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.
See you guys.